Morning, everybody. Thanks for coming to Bluff Regional Battlefield Park. My name's Tony Wickham. With us today is, with the guiding tour, is Mr. Jim Anderson. Thanks very much for coming out. How many? I know Jim gave a real good Zoom speech or Zoom background on Bluff. So how many are from the Civil War Roundtable from D.C.?
D.C.
Quite a few. Oh, but none of these are.
Okay.
Wow. Very good. All right. I'll just hit. Where are y'all from?
Percival.
Percival? Aldi. Okay. Fairmont.
Thurmont.
Maryland.
Maryland. There we go.
Merlin.
Ashburn. Ashburn. Okay.
Pennsylvania.
New Jersey? Excellent. Culpeper. Hillsborough.
Okay.
So, Ashburn, local? Falls Church, okay. And anybody from
Alexandria.
There we go,
Alexandria.
Alexandria. There
All
we go.
Leesburg.
Leesburg.
Rockville, Maryland. Okay. Well, welcome. Thanks very much. This is the 160th anniversary of the Battle of Bluff. You are standing basically in the rear area of the Confederate battle line during much of this battle. It was an early battle in the war, exactly 3 months after the first Bull Run, and a lot of things are going on. And I'll pass it now to my colleague Jim Anderson to kind of give more of the background.
Okay. All right. Great. One other thing. So do we have people here that you have ancestors who fought in the Civil War? How many Confederates? How many Confederates do we have? They're willing to admit it. Okay. Call out a state or a unit.
6th Virginia Regiment.
6th Virginia.
8th Virginia.
8th Virginia.
35th Virginia.
8th Virginia?
8th Virginia.
All right.
Local boys.
Yeah. 15th Alabama. All right. How about anybody else?
West Virginia for him, but I don't know what.
Or my father's, as he used to say, West by God, Virginia. Yes, right. Union, U.S. Okay, call it out.
20th Massachusetts.
Whoa. All right.
Very good. Harvard grad.
Second U.S.
99th Pennsylvania.
99th Pennsylvania.
71st. 4th Pennsylvania Reserves.
150th New York.
11th Ohio. All right. Woo.
142nd Pennsylvania.
It was New Hampshire, but I don't know which.
All right. Very good.
Excellent.
Well, one thing I like to point out, and that's great, that connection, especially the 8th Virginia and the 20th Mass, you guys can fight it out later on. Because those units were both here. The 20th Mass, of course, is the Harvard Regiment, right? 8th Virginia are local boys. That regiment was raised, half of them here in Loudoun County, and the other half in the surrounding counties, Fairfax. So they're home. Mm-hmm. And their commander is Colonel Eppa Hutton, who had a significant political career after the war. They will be here on the battlefield. We're going to talk about them a lot today. The other thing I like to point out is a lot of people say, especially younger folks, the Civil War is back in the day. It's either happened during my lifetime or it's back in the day, right? And so what I like to do is start off, and I don't know how well you'll be able to see this, but I'll give you an idea. So here's two gentlemen, both in uniform. This man is my grandfather. That picture was taken in 1918 in Montgomery, Alabama, on the steps of the Capitol where Jefferson Davis was sworn in as President of the Confederacy. My grandfather was in training on his way to France, where he went over the top in the Argonne Offensive, the last offensive of World War I. He was wounded and got the flu and survived. Now, he's shaking hands with a Confederate veteran. Now, I used to spend summers working on my grandfather's farm in Ohio, and he was a history teacher as well, so I come by it honestly. And he used to tell me stories about the Civil War that he heard from an eyewitness, from an actual veteran. So how long ago was it really? And you know, and people, will, especially some of my Boy Scout friends, will say, "Yeah, but you're old too." Well, fair enough. So what's going on? Sorry?
Some people are still fighting it today.
So, oh yeah, definitely, and we probably always will. What I worry about a little bit, and we can talk about that privately later on, is I want to make sure that we continue to tell these stories. We're storytellers. I think the best historians are storytellers. It's important to get it right, you know, and we can, and what is truth and what is history does vary. It has varied over the years, but what's going on here in the summer, late summer, early fall of 1861? Well, Lincoln has only been as president for a few months since March of '61. There's been one major battle at Bull Run or Manassas, again, depending on which side you're on, right? 30 miles south of here. That was the battle that basically convinced everyone on both sides, pretty much, that this wasn't going to be a one-battle war. There was a lot of misunderstanding or lack of really realism of what was going to be happening over the next 4 years. Most people on both sides thought one battle, that'll be it. I mean, Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers for 90 days. 90 days! The reason the Battle of Bull Run was fought, one of the reasons, was because the Army was about to go home. The 90 days was about up. So, disaster for the United States, for the Union. But both sides recognized we've got to recruit soldiers here. The United States Army at the beginning of the war was about 17,000 officers and men. 17,000, 4 general officers. Some people say that's 4 too many. 29 colonels, something like that. 29 colonels, that was it. By the end of those 4 years, 3 million men had served in one army or the other. 2 million in the United States Army and 1 million in the Confederate Army. That's a lot of people to recruit, train, feed, house, lead. And so that's what's going on in that late summer, between the exact 3 months, July to October, between First Manassas, First Bull Run, and the battle here, Ball's Bluff. They're recruiting, they're training, they're federalizing troops, bringing them into the national armies on both sides. But here, right here, is kind of a backwater. As one of the soldiers, they're keeping an eye on each other across the Potomac, which is the boundary between the United States and the Confederate States, for 4 years, right? Now, it's not as much of a boundary militarily as you might think. The bridges are down, but there's something like 17 places along the Potomac between here and Harper's Ferry where you can walk across you can wade it. I've done it several times. A couple of times sober. So they're keeping an eye on each other with the troops that they've already enlisted as they're growing their armies. And as one of the soldiers that was here kept a diary, and he said, it was for those months, it was a very civil war. Not much going on, talking to each other across the river. Most of the Confederate Army by September of 1861 has pulled back from Alexandria, Arlington, that Fairfax, that area, has pulled back south of here to the area around Centerville Heights, for those of you who are local and are aware of that area, primarily to protect the rail junction at Manassas. The only Confederate troops that are this close to Washington are right here, and it's one small brigade, 2,800 to 3,000 men, under Shanks Evans. Colonel Nathan Evans, there he is. If you look closely at his picture, if you get a chance, you might not be surprised when I say he was a hard drinker. He's got that stare. You don't want to cross him. He was West Point trained, actually a good officer, got a good reputation from First Manassas or First Bull Run. But he's basically a tripwire. He's got 2,800 men to cover miles of the river. And they're here because of Leesburg behind us. Leesburg is the intersection of two major roads, and roads are going to be avenues of attack depending on whether you're coming to Washington or going to Richmond. The Carolina Road, US 15, north and south, and the Alexandria-Winchester Turnpike, Route 7. So tripwire protecting, not much in the way of combat going on. That and the on the other side of the river you've got Stone's. You have a picture. Brigadier General Charles Stone's Corps of Observation. Now it's not a corps; it's a division. They don't have corps until later on in the war. He's got about 6,000 or 7,000 men initially in the summer, and then he gets reinforced with something called the California Brigade. The California Brigade. All right, bear with me now, is the California Brigade is led by a sitting senator, Colonel Edward Baker, who is from Oregon by way of California by way of Illinois. Okay? So he's a lawyer in Illinois and very close friends with another lawyer from Illinois, Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln actually named one of his sons Edward Baker Lincoln. But Baker goes, I guess Illinois wasn't big enough for both of them politically. So Baker makes his fortune in California during the gold rush, and then after, opens a law office there. Can't get elected to Congress there either, so he winds up in the new state of Oregon, one of the first senators from the state of Oregon, and he manages to get back here. Think about getting here from Oregon in 1860, 1861. You got to go around. So he gets here just in time for the Civil War to begin. They want to make sure that California stays in the Union, stays part of the U.S., because California's got gold. And it takes money, gold, to prosecute a war. So, but it's going to be hard to get California troops here, so what they do is they raise a brigade and call it the California Brigade, 4 regiments. They start in New York and start recruiting there, and then Colonel Wister, who's, do you have a picture of Wister?
Keep going.
Is his law partner, is Baker's law partner, and he's from Philadelphia, and so they moved the recruiting to Philadelphia. So it's the it's the California Brigade, but they're mostly Irishmen from Philly. Okay, but the idea is to that California now has a stake in the war.
There he is.
There he is. There's Wister.
Oh, all right. So Stone's Corps of Observation gets reinforced with the California Brigade. And then also in early October, more Union troops come across the Potomac River on Chain Bridge, which was there at the time. And they set up camp at Langley on what is now CIA headquarters, where I spent about 27 years. And then the Pennsylvania reserves start moving down Route 7 toward Leesburg. And this makes Shanks Evans, the commander of the Confederate troops here, very nervous. Remember, there's a long tether between him and his 2,800 men and the rest of the Confederate army, about 40,000 men. So Shanks Evans is getting very nervous. There's some skirmishing upriver at Harper's Ferry, and he's now convinced, with all these extra troops on the other side of the river and now some on this side of the river, that he's going to be surrounded. And so 16th, 17th of October, a few days before this battle, he takes his entire command and moves south toward Oatlands Plantation on Route 15 south, if you know where that is. Stone Tower Winery, if that helps. Yeah. Okay, good. All right, now we know where we are. And so he's pulling back, and the fact that he has now pulled his men out of this area is noticed. The area around here is mixed in the sense of their loyalties. There are a number of Germans and Quakers who've moved down from Pennsylvania and Maryland, and they're loyal Unionists, and they report that intelligence information. The Confederates have gone to Stone and his command on the other side of the river. Now you want to go ahead. At this point, we're going to...
At this point, let's talk a little bit about communications. Go talk about communications throughout this battle. One of the things that Shanks Evans pulls his folks back, what doesn't he do? Anybody? Communications? He doesn't inform his commander that he pulled back. So then he gets a message from his commander, General P.T. Beauregard, and he sends him this message. Sir, could you please read this message?
The commander wishes you to be informed of the reasons that influenced you to take up your present position, as you omit to inform him.
That's a bit of a, as they would say, a chewing. Yeah. And tells him to get back to where you were. We don't want to lose Leesburg just by giving it to the Union. So Evans pulls his guys back and his folks up to the river, but the Union has noticed. Okay, Jim.
Okay. So the question for the commander of Union troops in this area, the Army of the Potomac, George McClellan. Do you have a picture of George McClellan?
Don't. I'm shocked.
Anybody doesn't know George McClellan here? I mean, you know. George McClellan, I always like to say George McClellan's reputation as a soldier would have been much higher if he had burned the letters he sent to his wife. Think about that, all of you. George McClellan is now wondering, you know, that we've pushed the Confederates out of much of northern Virginia. They're back down at Centerville around Manassas. It would be lovely to have that rail junction at Leesburg without a fight. And if they've left, maybe we can just walk in. But how do I know if they're gone? So he sends the Pennsylvania Reserves from Langley down Route 7 toward Leesburg. Is that our next one?
Yes. But they go ahead and then we pull them back. That's
okay, all right. So you've got an entire division moving down Route 7 toward Leesburg, and Stone, Evans, the Confederate commander, notices that, and it takes him a couple days. This is very early in the war, and that's one of the main things to remember is most of these people have little or no training, including a lot of the officers. All the U.S. or Union troops who fought here, this is their first battle. The Confederates most of them had been at First Bull Run or Manassas, but again, very limited combat experience, and also not a lot of experience in good communication and CCC, command control communications and intelligence. So, Shanks is getting nervous. We've got the Pennsylvania Reserves moving down Route 7, and McClellan goes to their headquarters, and basically on the 19th, 19th. And they have gotten as far as Dulles Town Center, probably, Dulles Town Center Mall. And he says, the Confederates haven't reacted. So Shanks Evans is nervous, but he's moved his men back into position, but he's keeping his head down. He doesn't want to tip off his location. And so McClellan doesn't know whether or not there are Confederates there. So McClellan basically gives orders to the Pennsylvania Reserves to return to their position.
So this is 19 October. General McClellan ordered to General McCall, the commander of those troops.
The Pennsylvanians, yeah.
Return to Langley the next day.
Return to Langley.
So McCall has his orders, and he's going to delay a little while because he wants to do some mapping, because they didn't have, this was early in the war, and they didn't have good maps. But now, Stone, the commander on the Union side, thinks he's got another whole division headed toward Leesburg that will support him in anything he does. But now,
here's the message. So could you read this message?
Sure.
This is the next day.
General McClellan desires me to inform you that General McCall occupied Drainesville yesterday and is still there. We'll send out heavy reconnaissance today in all directions from that point. The general desires that you keep a good lookout upon Leesburg to see if this movement has the effect to drive them away. Perhaps a slight demonstration on your part would have the effect to move them.
okay, so a slight demonstration. What is left out of that order? Is that our next one?
No.
Or no, you don't. What is left out of that order is the fact that McClellan has now ordered the Pennsylvanians, McCall's division, to go back to Langley. Oops. So now that Stone is not going to have those 12,000 men because they're going to turn around and go home.
Wow.
So a slight demonstration. Stone's going, well, what can I do? And again, it's to try to either to get the Confederates to leave or at least to find out if they're still here. So down at Edwards Ferry, which is about 3 miles south of here, where Goose Creek runs into the Potomac, it's the, I don't know, what is that, the 9th tee of River Creek Country Club or something like that now, was Edwards Ferry. And so on the evening of the 20th, Stone sends a small group from the 1st Minnesota in boats across the river, and they just kind of stand there for a while to see if the Confederates react. And then they lob some artillery shells across the river into this area, but Shanks Evans is having none of it. He does not react. So Stone still doesn't know. He's now done his demonstration, but he isn't able to tell his boss the Confederates are here or they're not here. So late that evening, what's our next one?
Next one is the Telegraph from McClellan.
Okay. So you want to do that now, or you want to wait until we break up to do that? Or?
I'll do just this one point. What's
Okay, go ahead.
Communications? One of the great steps forward technologically is the telegraph. We can now, instead of sending a writer for hours to try to communicate with somebody, you can instantaneously send a message to somebody. And the Union at first was sending, McClellan's headquarters was sending messages through the United States Post Office to his generals. Marked, confidential, stamped on it. Okay, so that Stone told McClellan's headquarters that's not a good idea. So they started sending the messages by cipher or by telegraph, and because they didn't trust the telegraph operators either, they sent it in cipher. So the first one of the messages that McClellan's headquarters sent to Stone was this, and I apologize, but just start reading.
Sure. Brennan, in send side division shall forego on you, up on take to copper, me, Adams, other Amid, Camden, brass call, aid push, 2 river messages, lead cipher, your, of, or, I, whatever, 10.
Okay, everybody got that?
No.
It's gibberish. It's in cipher. It's in
code.
cipher.
It's a code.
Now, what is the only problem probably at General Stone's headquarters with that? He doesn't have the key. So he then says, I don't have the key. How do I tell my boss that I don't have the key?
Oh my God.
So he sends another cipher. Stone sends a message back to McClellan's headquarters that says, okay, I'm going to have to do this cleverly, so here's the message.
I've received the box, but have no key.
Okay?
Nobody's going to figure that out.
So McClellan's headquarters,
They don't.
They look at that and they go, what does that mean? So they send a squad to Stone's wife in Washington, D.C., and they say, do you have a key that we need to get back?
Unbelievable.
And of course, she says, "No, I don't." And finally, they do get a message gets, or they decipher the message doesn't get deciphered, and this was the message. Okay.
I think
Go
so.
ahead and read that, please, for me.
Send your messages to me in cipher. Call on Banks for whatever aid you need. Shall I push up a division or two on the other side of the river? Take Leesburg?
Okay. And this was the decoded telegram, never received. So communications are very important in combat, sir.
The other communication lesson here, tactically on the battlefield, is that Shanks Evans, the Confederate commander's headquarters, is less than 2 miles away. Fort Evans is still there. It was an earthen fort, or is an earthen fort, near the water tower, between the water tower and Costco. So of course you want to put your headquarters near Costco because it makes resupply easy. Just checking to see how many people are awake. So command and control is much easier for the Confederates because that tether, there's no telegraph. So you're sending a rider, but it's still only, it's still only a mile and a half, less than 2 miles. Stone is on the other side of the river with no bridges, and so his communication, his intelligence tether is going to be an hour and a half at least, as opposed to 15 minutes. So, and that's going to be the problem all day on the 21st when this battle is fought. Does that have anything more? That's it. Okay. So, it's now the evening of the 20th, 21st of October. The slight demonstration down at Edwards Ferry didn't work. The 1st Minnesota got back in their boats, went back across the river. Stone still doesn't know. So now he decides to come in the back door to see whether or not Leesburg is being guarded. And he's going to do that by sending some people across the river who are already on Harrison's Island. So the river is about, the Potomac River is about 300 yards in that direction. But there's an island in the middle of it that's 300 yards wide, Harrison's Island. So the logistics of getting that patrol here are not inconsequential. They got to find boats, for one thing. You get across part of the river to the island and then across the rest of the river. And then there's a 100-foot bluff here, just on the other side of the river. They've got to find their way up the bluff. And they come right down this road, which was a cart path at the time. And they is a small scouting party of about 20 men from the 15th Massachusetts. Colonel Charles Devens, right. Devens is the commander of the 15th Massachusetts, and he sends Captain Philbrick and about 20 men. And so I think at that point we're going to divide up then? Yeah. So what we're going to do now is this is kind of the precursor to the actual battle that takes place during the day on the 21st. But it starts with a recon, a small group of 20 men coming across the river here to find out if there are any Confederates here.
Question.
Yes.
Was the topography like it was now? Like was it heavily wooded or?
We worked that, Dave. I'm glad we worked that out ahead of time. Thank you for that question.
Right.
Yeah, great question. It was. Well, this has been a park. This is part of the NOVA Parks, Northern Virginia Parks Authority park system, and it's been part of the system since about 1984. We are part of the volunteer group, the Friends of Balls Bluff, who do volunteer tour guiding here and put on these programs. And in that period of time, starting about 2004, something like that, Nova Parks began doing what we call grooming the battlefield. It's happened other places too, like Gettysburg and Antietam and Manassas, Bull Run, taking down trees that had grown up in the intervening 150, 160 years to restore the battlefield to the way it looked to the people who fought there at the time. And that's critical for those of us today who are trying to tell a story. Because what they can see and when they can see it and what they can't see is critically important, particularly on the Civil War battlefield where you have very little communications and you have very little, I didn't say none, but very little aerial reconnaissance. Now they did have balloons. The Union Army did have a balloon corps. Most of those balloons are watching Manassas, Bull Run. There's no balloons up here to help the Union troops here. Yes, sir.
Did the Union know the location of Fort Evans?
Did the probably.
Okay.
Probably, and they probably knew that either from Sugarloaf Mountain,
Okay.
over in Maryland, where they had an observation post, or from the informants they had here among the German and Quaker community. That's a good question, though. Okay.
Want to take this?
All right. Why don't I take? I'll take all of the DC Civil War Roundtable folks, and you're going to take the rest of them. Which way you going?
I'll go the low road. You go to high.
Okay. We get the high road, of course, folks.
Hey, wait
All
a
right.
minute.
DC folks, come on with me.
What was the weather like during the battle?
During the battle, it was about like this, but the weeks prior to that, it had been raining very heavily, so the Potomac was up and fast moving. So you couldn't, and Potomac at the time was about 12 feet deep. And once again, to get across the river, you had to cross the C&O Canal, And then cross one side of the river to Harrison's Island, about 100 yards, and then go to Harrison's Island, cross the river again, about 80 yards, and it's about 12 feet deep, so it wasn't fordable. You had to have boats. As Jim also mentioned, this part of the battlefield used to look like that. It was just thick woods back in 2004. The Park Service came out here, Nova Parks came out here and cleared a lot of the trees to make it look much as it did. What you're seeing right here 160 years later is very similar to what a soldier in 1861 would have seen. And where you're standing is basically the Confederate line of main defensive line or defensive or Confederate line here during the battle. We talked about the recon. This is a reconnaissance that turns into a skirmish, that turns into a battle, that turns into a rout. That's the big picture of this whole battle. The reconnaissance went out there. They didn't see any Confederate soldiers. They saw what they thought was abandoned Confederate camp. They reported that back to their commander. General Stone said, okay, let's make a raid on that camp. So they sent the rest of the 15th Massachusetts, or half of the 15th Massachusetts, about 300 guys, out to raid that camp. They get there about 6 o'clock in the morning. The sun's not quite up, the sun at this time of year. And they look out, and they, with Captain Philbrick and his commander, Colonel Devens, and they don't see anything. They don't see any tents, they don't see anything. What they think happened, it was a full moon, much like it is last night, and the shadows on some trees made it kind of look like tents. So bad reporting. They once again, inexperienced, they didn't scout out those positions. By then, the Confederates have spotted 300 Union troops that have been here across the river, and they start firing at them. So there's a small skirmish out basically what we call the Jackson House, or basically where the neighborhood ends and the woods begins. That's where the battle, that's where the skirmish happened, and that they held their line pretty well, the Union did, for all morning on the 21st. Eventually they pulled back, they lost some troops. Once again, let's talk about weapons. The 15th Massachusetts had smoothbore muskets. Some of the Confederates had rifled muskets. So the Union troops had about 9 casualties and 1 death. They lost 1 soldier out there. They pull back, but in good order, the Union troops do, and they march right down the cart path here, back to the main line, which is basically where that cannon is, sitting in the middle of the field over there. Okay.
300 versus, I'm sorry, how many?
It was funny, during the entire battle, as people were feeding, Evans and Stone were feeding people in, it kept about even numbers the entire time. So it was about 300 Confederates versus 300 Union troops. Confederates had some cavalry with them, which put the skeer in the Union troops a little bit, and that's one of the reasons they fell back. They didn't want to get flanked. Let's see here. Talked about Epahutton. Epahutton takes the 8th Virginia, all local, mostly local Loudoun County boys, up here, and he brings them up to just about where you're standing, and he tells them to lay down. They lay down and are taking pot shots at the Union troops, who they can see just on the other side of that open area, just beyond where that cannon is located, and that cemetery. The Union commander, they get more troops ferried across, and they decide, well, let's try to push out and push these Confederate troops that are taking pot shots at us off this ridge line along here. The Union troops come up from the 1st California, Pennsylvania soldiers. Philadelphia Brigade, yes ma'am. And then they get up to about where we're standing. The Confederates are ordered to stand up. They stand up, and the Union troops said it was like they were rising out of the ground. And the Confederate troops lower their muskets, the Union troops lower their muskets, and they fire at each other, fire volleys at each other. Now, what's the problem with Civil War weapon once you fire your musket?
Reload it.
You got to reload it, and there's smoke and there's confusion. So they fire their muskets. They don't have any other rounds to fire at that moment. They're very close to each other, so they what they call a melee. They go after each other with club muskets. They turn their muskets around, whack each other across the head with it. A brief fight ensues there, and then both troops from the 1st California and the 8th Virginia pull back. So the 1st California goes back to the ridgeline over there, and the 8th Virginia pulls back to what we call the Jackson House. So they abandon this ridge. The next unit to come up, Nathan Evans orders another unit to come up. It's from the 18th Mississippi, Rasmus Burt, and let's see, how did they get here in Virginia? How do you think they got transported here? Train. There we go. Another technological advancement of war. They came up here on train, and they were called what they called the Doctor's Regiment, because there were about 65 gentlemen in this regiment that claimed they were doctors from the upper Mississippi area. Problem that the regimental surgeon always had, he's always getting second guessed. They advance online, and that's what we're going to do here. Let me see where Jim's folks are. They're still back there, and we're going to go a little bit farther and follow the movement of the 18th Mississippi, about 600 soldiers as they advance toward the Union line, who they see right along that wood line just across that little open area here. So that's where we're going to go next. Follow me, please.
Hey, did they make that move in formation, or did they have to funnel?
They went formed a line, double lines, so of about 300 men across, 300 behind them, and came across this open area.
Before you start, I want to let everybody know the skirmish starts at noon. They're going to go right through here. Okay, so you're going to be over there if you're going to be watching it. That's the best place to see it, because then you'll be able to see them from the side coming at each other. Okay, so that's what happens at noon, and the sooner you get over there after Tony is done with you, that's good.
That's real good.
Okay. Ammunition. Okay, we'll do very quick line. Okay. The 18th Mississippi comes up here. What they see the Union troops by the what's now the cemetery in this wood line right along here. What they don't see is the 15th Massachusetts that is all along this wood line here. So they're basically in the shape. The Union troops are in the shape of an L, so it's like an L-shaped ambush that the 18th Mississippi is walking into. Ooh. They fire in one volley at the 18th Mississippi. 45 of their men go down, including their commander, Erasmus Burt. He gets shot in the hip.
I think I can
he says he's wounded. He's mortally wounded and taken back to Leesburg and dies a few days later. Okay? 18th Mississippi falls back, and I'll do this. Let's go over there so we don't get in the way of the Mississippi. A man talked about the size of the units. I talked about them. A company was typically 100 guys, fully manned. You got to think also, though, you've got people on picket duty, people on cooking duty, people on security, and then guys being sick. Once again, sickness just ravaged these units throughout the Civil War. So 60 guys in a company was pretty good, fully manned and ready for duty. 60. After the 18th Mississippi falls back, more Union troops come forward. The commander finally gets upon the battlefield.
Known as George Washington?
No, not George, but close. It was, there we go. Colonel Edward Baker, once again. Colonel Edward Baker, sitting U.S. Senator. He gets upon the battlefield. He's had some experience in the Mexican War, no combat experience though. And he gets up here and he tries to do his best. He helps get troops across the river. He helps with the boats getting across the river, but doesn't get up here to the battlefield, and secondly, doesn't put anybody in charge at the time. and that's a problem. And then when he gets up here, the cannons and the howitzers that the Union had brought up here, those crews were wearing very nice brand new uniforms with red piping that tends to draw the eye, and those troops were shot down very quickly by the Confederates that are up here on this ridge. The Union, and then to man one of the cannons, Colonel Baker takes some other officers, and they're loading the cannon because they're the ones that know from experience how to at least load the cannon and fire it. That's a good thing, but is that what a brigade commander should be doing? That's the whole issue. He asks his commanders on the ground that are up here, his regimental commanders, how are we doing? And almost to the man they say, sir, we're okay on this side. There's a ridge there that's protecting our flank over on this one side, but the other side there are Confederate troops flanking us and shooting at our troops and all the way down to the river. And that's a problem. We need to push forward and push those Confederates and give us some room to maneuver here to give us a solid footing. He doesn't do that. He decides not to do that. And soon after, he does lead some men forward. Unfortunately, once again, talking about uniforms, he is in his, it's not in this uniform, he's in his full dress regalia with the, with the little gold epaulets on the shoulders. That once again kind of draws the eye. Confederates release a volley, and Edward Baker is hit 8 times. 8 times, once in the temple. He's dead. So this is the only U.S. sitting senator that dies during the war, in a battle during the Civil War. Baker falls. The Union troops fall back. The Confederates go forward. They see this nice uniform. They try to drag him back. That upsets the Union troops. They come forward. There's a hand-to-hand fighting to get his body back. They do get him back. He lays in state at the Capitol in Washington, D.C. He was a very close friend of Abraham Lincoln. If you remember, General Stone was providing security for Lincoln's carriage during the inauguration. Inside the carriage was Edward Baker, good friend of of the president. Okay, the president. It's reported that Lincoln cried when he heard that Baker had been killed. Baker's body is eventually taken by ship all the way down to the Isthmus of Panama, put on a railroad, which he helped build, to the other side, to the Pacific side, and is laid to rest now in the Presidio of San Francisco. That's where he's buried at. How about that? There's a crisis of command now. The commander's down. There's other commanders that are wounded, regimental commanders that are wounded, and then arriving on the battlefield is, at just the time, the 17th Mississippi, a brand new, fresh regiment of Confederates. The Union troops have been firing all day. It's about 6 o'clock at night, and the Confederates get in line once again, double ranks, and come forward. Other Confederate troops join them, so about 1,000 Confederate troops move forward across this open area, and the Union troops are running low on ammo. They fight them off as best they can, but the Union troops then panic and start going toward the river. Once we get done with the demonstration, if those of you that want, we can continue this tour. But the Union troops are panicked now. They're going toward the river. It's getting late at night. The Confederate troops don't follow them down to the river. They just stand up on the bluff and shoot down at them. And that panics them even more. The Union troops get in the river. There's boats with wounded in it crossing the river. Union troops run into the river, grab the gunnels of the boats, and pull them down. So they lose all their boats. So now they're trapped. So there's about 500 Union troops that can't swim on this side of the river. Confederates come down and say, you need to surrender. Union troops say, no, we're not going to surrender. Confederates fire on them. And they say, the Union troops then go, well, who am I going to surrender to? The Confederate commander looked over at a young soldier next to him, Elijah White, and said, you're going to surrender to General White. And the Union troops said, okay, that's an honorable thing. So they surrender, about 500 of them. They're marched down to the Leesburg courthouse, spend the night in the open area around the Leesburg courthouse, and then are marched in a driving rainstorm the next day down to Manassas, where they're put on a train, sent down to Virginia, paraded through the streets of Richmond, and put in a tobacco house to house POWs. The vast majority of them stay as prisoners of war for the next 3 months as guests of the Confederacy, and then are exchanged for Union troops. So they'll come back. Some notables in the battle. In the 20th Mass, there was a lady here from the 20th, had relatives from the 20th Mass. Well, there we go, sir.
Just a quick question.
Yes,
on
sir.
A typical loadout of a soldier. How many rounds of ammunition would they carry?
That's the thing. In a typical cartridge box, you've got 40 rounds. A well-trained soldier, they say 3 times a minute. I think under fire, twice a minute is probably more accurate. So a trained soldier firing 2 rounds a minute has 40 rounds in his cartridge box. How long can he fire for?
Oh no.
Without ammo. There are reports of the Union troops going forward into these ditches because there were downed troops from the 18th Mississippi that were laying there, and they went down there with knives and cut the cartridge boxes off the wounded and dead soldiers to get ammo because the ammo wasn't coming across.
My apologies to the court group, but we're about to start some activities.
Continuing on, so this is a major defeat for the Union forces. They've lost about 200 dead, 200 wounded, and 500 prisoners of war. Okay. See the skirmishers working in teams of 2. Once again, one guy covering and another guy firing. They're moving forward toward each other, trying to develop the situation, see what's going on, feel each other out. They're behind these guys. In the real world, there's an entire regiment waiting to either attack or defend as these guys develop the situation on what's going on in front of them.
Wow, is that milk? Is it done? Is it done, Mom?
As you can see, the gentlemen in the woods especially, they're using, one guy's bounding, the other guy's firing to try to cover each other as they move forward. And skirmishers would, normally they wouldn't just stand out in the open, they would get behind something to fire or lay down to try to cover themselves so they wouldn't get shot. photo not a very slow developing type. So you have to stay very still on all these pictures. Lady asked me, was he buried in Panama? No, he was transported across Panama, the isthmus, because there was no Panama Canal at that time, but there was a railroad that he had helped build. It was transported by train across the Pacific Ocean, then by boat up to the Presidio where he was buried in California.
So how many are from California?
Very, most of them are Philadelphia soldiers. So after the war, or after Baker was killed, the California regiment was later renamed. It was renamed the Philadelphia Regiment. And if you note, if you're a historical buff at all, they were at the angle at Gettysburg.
Oh wow. In a web, right? Jerry window.
Something's happening.
Yeah, women did travel sometimes with them. They would because they're within in the rifles.
Right,
muskets.
right. Just wonder if they would.
Retreat. So now they're pulling back, and they pull back the same way they move forward in teams. To pull back, usually trying to seek cover where they could. There was probably a company commander in charge of the skirmish troops that were going forward. They would designate one company. As war went on, the companies that they would designate a company to be the skirmishers, they would be the ones that would always go forward. So training that they were doing to try to keep themselves safe. Like you can see a muzzle loading weapon, whether it's a rifle or a smoothbore, it takes 9 steps to reload because it's all powder cartridges that they're getting from their cartridge belt. Each soldier holds about, or has about 40 rounds. Sometimes they would up that to 60 rounds, and they take the rounds, stick them in their pockets, and then use them as they the styles of fighting were very similar. There was a tactical book. There was a book on a manual on tactics that was written by a colonel at the time, Hardee. There was a manual of tactics. And Civil War, Colonel Hardee, he was born in the South, so he joined the Confederacy and became General Hardee, but the Union still used his book to train their troops. And once again, this was a Cummins. We had a very small active duty force of several thousand, and now we're talking about hundreds of millions of soldiers learning their craft on the job training. We have records that show the oldest soldier here to die was Colonel Baker. He was 49 years old. The youngest soldier here was from the 18th Mississippi. He was 16. Now you say, well, how can a 16-year-old join? How can you do that?
He lied.
Well, he didn't lie. This is kind of funny about the soldiers during the Civil War. They would, like for the Mississippi soldiers, this is the story. Remember, this is a story. That they would get their boot and they'd put the number 18 and stick it in their shoe. And then the recruiter would go, "How old are you?" "I'm over 18. The 17th Mississippi had a bunch of 16-year-olds in their ranks too, and what happened as they came up here, a lot of them were dying, not from combat, but from disease. And it was affecting their morale, so they sent a bunch of those soldiers back home. But there were still 16-year-olds in the ranks. This time of the war, they were all volunteers, but in 1861, in April of 1862, the Confederacy institutes the first draft in the Northern Hemisphere, or in the Western Hemisphere. Anyone between the age of 18 and 35, congratulations, you're now eligible to be in the Confederate military. And oh, by the way, these volunteers that signed up for 1 year, well, now you're extended. Congratulations. The next year, the Confederacy instituted another draft, this time, let me think here, 17 to 45. And if you're already in the Confederate military, congratulations, you're now in the military until the conclusion of the war. So you didn't have a choice.
Were there limitations of the only son of the family?
There were, in many of the Confederacy, if your family had over 20 slaves, you could keep one son back for 20 slaves. In the North, they had this thing that you could hire someone as a replacement, and they would serve for you. Doesn't seem quite fair, but that's what had happened. Yeah. Big change. Yeah, Teddy Roosevelt's father got out of the war because he hired somebody to take his place.
Did they do that in the South with the slaves? Didn't they send their no? Did they send
For
their slaves to fight?
They instituted on the draft. They had a certain policy that said if you owned 20 slaves, over 20 slaves, you didn't have to be in the military.
But did they ever send
Would
like
they send
a slave
in
instead of
place?
themselves in their place?
Oh no. Not that part of the war. At the very end of the war, the Confederacy did draft some former slaves, and they said if you go fight for the Confederacy, you can be free when you're done.
Okay.
That's the very end of the war, and they really didn't play a big part in it. The slaves did play a big part of the war, helping the Confederacy, dig entrenchments, all the admin stuff, drive horses and buggies or supply wagons during the war, so they were helping the South, and the Union said because they're doing that, they are contraband of war. They are helping the Southern cause, so we have a right to seize them and keep them as contraband of war. And basically what it was is they would basically free those slaves that had been captured.
Tony, do you know at this point in the war were they using parole to exchange?
Yeah, this part of the war, still very early in the war, they were exchanging soldiers. They were also, the Union troops, they would parole. If they have a large group of soldiers, they would parole them. And basically it was a promise that said, I won't fight anymore until I'm properly exchanged with a Confederate soldier. So they'd stay out of the military for several months at a time until someone officially told them, oh, we exchanged a Confederate soldier for you, you can be back in the Union Army, and vice versa. That worked to a certain extent. Certain guys went home and never came back.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it.
A lot of them took some time off.
Pipe and drum corps, they add so much to the ceremony. Thank you.
A very early conflict on American soil happened right on this terrain that you just traversed, as did we. We're here to honor the soldier very glad to represent history, our American history, which we all be proud of. We need to do some safety measures to clear our weapons. I would like to have a moment of silence. We're going to uncover in honor of the soldiers that died here. Uncover. Recover. Thank you for that. If you haven't seen the schedule, I do believe they're still planning to do band presentations, an artillery demonstration at 2 o'clock, and also for those that are still around, they're going to be lighting luminaries, 300 luminaries, up at the cemetery with a reading of the names of the soldiers that fell here, and we're also going to have a nighttime 21-gun salute. So if you're here at 7 o'clock for that, we'd be glad to have you see that. And again, we are safe now, so please come up and interact with us, and I hope you enjoy your afternoon. Thank you.
Well, thanks everybody for still following me. We'll get started here in just a second. Thanks for hanging with us. We'll talk a little bit about the cemetery. After the battle, there was a truce called. The Union sent a small burial party over here across the river to bury the dead that had fallen. Confederates let them bury about 2/3 of the dead, and then there was some movement down on Harrison's Island. Confederates said, "Hey, what's going on down here?" And I'm sorry, you can't stay here and finish burying your dead. You got to go back. So several dozen U.S. soldiers were left upon this battlefield unburied. After the Confederates pulled back in February of 1862, the Union did move up into this area, recovered the dead that hadn't been buried, and some of them that had been buried in shallow graves, and opened up basically what was a trench and buried them somewhere in the open area just to your rear in a shallow grave. In 1865 and 66, the United States made a concerted effort to recover all the Union soldiers that had died upon the battlefields, this being one of them. And they came out to Ball's Bluff with a burial party. Unfortunately, the trench was very shallow, had been washed, a lot of the dirt had been washed away. Wild animals and pigs had been in the area, and so this area was covered with loose bones, unfortunately. The burial parties gathered the bones together, put them in small caskets, boxes really, small caskets, and put them in this cemetery. There are 25 graves in the cemetery containing the remains of 54 Union soldiers. The Confederate soldiers had been policed up by their troops after the battle, and most of their soldiers had been buried either in private cemeteries or, like many of the Mississippians, were taken to what they call Union Cemetery in Leesburg and buried in a common grave in Leesburg Cemetery. They didn't make it back home, unfortunately. Okay. Questions on that? Once again, 25 graves, but 54 bodies. The reason they know 54 bodies, 54 skulls. That's how they knew.
Do you know how many total people were here at one time?
As far as
fighting the
yes,
soldiers.
yes. I probably missed it. It was funny. It was kind of funny. The troops were fed into the battle. It started out with 20 against 20, then about 300 against 300 during the morning battle, and then it got up to about 1,700 Confederates against 1,700 Union troops by the end of the battle. The Union, God bless them, they got 1,700 troops across the river in 3 basically skiffs, which are like rowboats, and a canal barge that they had lifted out of the canal physically, plopped it down in the Potomac, and then pulled it across. And that's how they got the cannon. The Union troops got a cannon, and 2 mountain howitzers across the river. Once again, they're new troops. The cannon and the howitzers were running low on ammo. There are reports that, at least with the howitzers, that at the end of the battle they had powder charges but no rounds. So they were putting the powder in, picking up some rocks off the battlefield, and firing that off because they were so low on ammo. The howitzer and the cannon and the 2 howitzers were lost because the Union was defeated and pushed back across the river. Both of those, or all 3 of those, were they started the morning as Union cannon and they ended the afternoon as Confederate. And one of them, usually the howitzers were given to the artillery, or given to the cavalry. One of those mountain howitzers probably served as a mountain howitzer for Jeb Stuart's artillery. Okay. At the end of the conflict ended, we had both sides trying to reconcile with each other. In about 1874, 15th Massachusetts veterans came out here. They were escorted by Eppa Hutton, the former commander of the 8th Virginia, and they mentioned they remembered a very tall, red-headed soldier that had been the flag bearer for the 8th Virginia and had fallen on this battlefield. And the Eppa Hutton knew who that was. He said, yes, that was Terrence
Clinton Hatcher.
Clinton Hatcher. Thank you, Terry Hatcher. Clinton Hatcher, once again, very tall individual, bright red hair. Before the war had started, he had went to the White House and had talked to Lincoln. How's that? And very brave soldier. He was coming from a Quaker family, but he volunteered. And unfortunately, once again, a big guy carrying a flag. You're a target, and he died on this battlefield. He was later taken back to his family cemetery and buried there here in Virginia. After they learned that, the 15th Massachusetts soldiers veterans now, went back to Massachusetts, and arriving on a rail car was a big block of granite that is just down there. You can go by it as you leave today. It's in honor of Hatcher. And it said a soldier who fought bravely for his native state. And we can't prove that it was from the 15th Massachusetts, but it is made from some Massachusetts granite that's only found in the area where the 15th Massachusetts soldiers had mustered. So we're pretty sure that they had made that and to memorialize him to bring back here. You'll see another memorial stone back there. That's to Edward Baker. It's a little confusing because it says the 71st Pennsylvania. They were the 71st Pennsylvania, but they're also the 1st California, or regiment. But that memorial stone was probably placed there. Once again, we're interpreting things. That's where Baker was probably killed up here by somewhere in the vicinity of the oak trees, and then brought back to a covered area, and his body was probably laid there for a while troops went by him. So they said, well, that's probably where he died, but he actually died just a few feet away, honestly, at that location. But they memorialized him with a stone there. If you go to the United States Congress, there is a full-size marble statue of Edward Baker, believe it or not, holding a top, or at his feet is a top hat, and he's in a toga. I don't know. I don't know how to explain these things. I don't know. All right. We talked about, let me see here, Oliver Wendell Holmes, along with, he's part of the 20th Massachusetts. Along with him were, and I'm coming to it, just wait for it. Maybe. Were two grandsons of Paul Revere. No kidding. And I know I got the pictures. I know I did.
Is he?
There we go. There we go. One of the sons was the regimental surgeon, Paul J. Revere. Okay. He survived this battle. He was taken prisoner, but he was then exchanged, once again released from the Confederate prison, and then he fought. He was killed at the Battle of Antietam. Oliver Wendell Holmes was right beside him when he was shot. He said he was ministering to another soldier along their firing line with his horse's reins in his hands, and Holmes looked away, and then he looked back, and he was dead. He's killed. His brother, now,
wow,
timing is
two
everything.
brothers.
Major Edward Revere, once again another grandson of Paul Revere, was the executive officer for the 20th Massachusetts. He was also captured and then later released. At Gettysburg, second day, he was hit in the head with a piece of shrapnel from an artillery shell and died. So both Revere brothers did not survive the war.
Except for one, and that is
well,
Paul
Oliver Wendell Holmes.
Revere.
Oliver Wendell Holmes did survive the war, even after being wounded again at Chancellorsville. There we go. Became a Supreme Court justice in 1874. He made a speech during Memorial Day, and these were, if you remember the Ken Burns series, the Civil War, it opens with Oliver Wendell Holmes. It's in part it says, in our youth, our hearts were touched with fire, and it was given to us to learn from the outset that life is a profound and passionate thing, and that our dead brothers still speak to us and bid us think of life, not death, and that as I listen, the trumpet sounds once more a note of daring, hope, and will. So, strong words, powerful words from Supreme Court Justice, and remember, don't shout fire in a crowded movie house. That's where that came from too. All right. He served under. He was elected, or he was made Supreme Court Justice by Teddy Roosevelt, and he served on the High Court for over 20 years. They called him the Great Dissenter. The Great Dissenter. Very well spoken and written. Okay. With that, are there any questions, multiple questions, or anything that's burning in your mind on this battlefield? It's once again a great, wonderful location here, well preserved, and converted to what it looked like to those soldiers in 1861. Glad to have you out here. We do tours every weekend at 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock. Today you'll have the cannon firing, you'll have the bands playing, and then tonight we'll have luminaries all the way up this battlefield to memorialize those soldiers that were killed or died of wounds on this battlefield, which is about 230 some Union troops and about 50 Confederate troops died here or died of their wounds soon after the battle. Okay. Whew. Any other questions? This is a VA cemetery. This is the third smallest VA cemetery in the Veterans Administration system. As you see here, we're right now on the sacred soil of Virginia. You go over there, that's federal property, and there's a little sign on the gate that says no firearms allowed inside this property. So that but this is the third smallest 10 by 10 yards area. It only contains the remains of those soldiers that had died at Ball's Bluff. Okay. And there's only one of them. All of them are unknown except one. One up at the top was James Allen. There we go. I can read it. James Allen, who was probably killed during the opening skirmish out by the Jackson House, out by where the neighborhood is now. Because the family that owned the place, there's notes that there was a dead soldier, unfortunately, laying in their front yard, and so they
Buried him.
Buried him. Yes, yes, ma'am. Made and put a marker there, and then after the war, the burial party discovered or learned that there was a soldier there, and they knew what his name was. So he's the only soldier. Unfortunately, if you read some of, I'm trying to remember this Republic of Suffering. There's a book written about the casualties in the Civil War. About, if I remember right, about 60% of soldiers that fell upon the battlefield are buried in unknown graves, or are buried under a grave that says unknown, because they didn't have dog tags, they didn't have, and then when you died, your body was gathered intelligence information, or they were looking for things to take off of you. So your identity wasn't well known, or would unfortunately rot from being outside. All right. Any other questions? I can keep going.
Oh, yes.
Smallest VA cemetery is in Washington, D.C. I'm trying to remember the name of it. But it's just a little plot. It's up by Fort Stevens. But it is there. Look it up. You can Google it. Yes, sir. Anything else? Anything else? Ma'am, you had some good questions on the way up. I'm trying to remember what they were. See,
I'll say.
There was an African American that fought during this battle, believe it or not. And I'm taking this, here's my story and I'm sticking to it, is that I believe, Tony Wickham believes, that this was the first battlefield where an African American fought for the Union. I think. Because there was basically a butler that came up with one of the officers from the 15th Massachusetts, and he said, "Sir, I want to fight during this battle." So they gave him a Union top coat, gave him a weapon, and he fought during this battle.
That will be a gun.
It was a gun, yes, ma'am. And then he was captured. Think about this, what's going through his mind. He was captured, and 5 years ago we thought that he was captured, sent south, and sold into slavery. We thought. But last year we discovered the records of soldiers that had been exchanged from the Union Army, from the Confederacy to the Union Army, and 5 of them at the top were noted that they were, the term was at the time Negroes, 5 of them. And one of them, the last name matched this soldier. So he was returned. We are trying to see if he ever joined the 54th Massachusetts, the first all-black regiment, but we're not sure. I can't prove anything. But it sure, that makes a great story though, doesn't it? Okay. Sir.
How's the Union get the cannon up the cliffs? Did they go around?
With great effort. No, sir, they manhandled those things. The howitzers, they could break apart and carry up individual pieces. But this main cannon that's setting up right over there, that's a replica, but that's the size of the cannon. That thing weighs 2,000 pounds. They manhandled that thing up a cow path, back and forth, up till it got up here. They hooked it up probably in the slow ground over here, hooked it back up to the horses. They came roaring out through up to here to set up the cannon. That once again kind of catches the eye. And Confederates shot at the horses. The horses panicked, ran over some guys, some other Union soldiers. They unhooked the cannon and then put it into service, firing at the Confederates. We're only about, from here to that ridge line where the 8th Virginia set up their lines, is only about 267 yards. So it's well within rifle range, and even, but it's a very short fuse, so it's limited on the effectiveness of the cannon. And they came up here with a basic load without any canister rounds, they didn't have any anti-personnel rounds per se coming up here. And that was a lesson learned. After that, there was commands that were instructed the Union Army to have canister rounds in their basic load, because they just didn't have it at the time when they got to this battlefield. All right. Any other questions? Once again, I love this kind of thing because you can go small battlefield. You can go deep. You can go really deep on learning the people that were here, learning the personalities, and learning about the battlefield. And you can see basically the entire battlefield here just by standing here. And so it's great. Please bring your folk, bring your family, bring your friends, bring your neighbors, bring them on out here, and we'll have an American experience for you, learning about your past and your history. Okay. Any other questions?
Are you planning on going up to the bluff at all? Are you planning on going up to the bluff at all, the overlook?
We can if you'd like. Okay, I'll take the group, if you want, to the bluffs. I think during the actual battle there were less trees here. In some of the pictures they show a few trees up here on the bluff, but not a lot. I think once again, that's a function of cows. The cattle would eat all the underbrush, and so it was much more park-like, believe it or not, than it is now with all this underbrush. Toward the end of the battle, the Union troops, well, they had, as you see, this is the edge. It is, you can see down, if you look hard, there is a little window down there. You can see the river. It's about 100 yards down there, almost straight down. This is a cliff. This is a bluff. The trees, you see the sycamore trees that are just across the way there. Those trees, the white trunks, that's how you know they're sycamore. That's on Harrison's Island. And then there, beyond that island, in the next level over where the far trees are, the darker trees are, that is Maryland on the other side of the river. So you got to cross the river twice here to get across. And there are, Confederates did report that Union troops threw themselves off the cliff. We don't think that's a bit of a story. We don't think that's quite accurate. What they did do, though, they knew only one way up here, and that's basically down the path that we're going to walk down, and then on a little cow path that goes back and forth until it gets to the bottom. So the Union troops that are on this end were pushing the other Union troops down the slope because they were trying to save their lives, basically. And the Confederates, once again, came up to the bluff, stopped here because they could see people down the bottom, and then we're shooting down at them right at dusk, right about 6:30 on the evening of October 21st, 1861. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So you said before that the Confederates were supported by a fort, right?
Yes, sir.
So did they have any artillery on the battlefield?
Good question. Very good question. They had artillery, but they did not bring any to this battlefield because they were worried that there would be an even larger Union force, and so they were holding their artillery back to ambush any Union troops that pushed forward. They're right beside the corner of Edwards Ferry Road and Battlefield Parkway. There is a little sign there off to the side. You got to look hard for it nowadays. That is what they call a hidden battery. So there was a battery of artillery right there beside the road. The battlements for that artillery battery is still there in the woods. And then up on top of the hill by Rehow, with the company Rehow now, there is Fort Evans, and actually the ramparts of that are still preserved. They're mounds of dirt now, but they're up there. They're protecting the strategic entry of Dick's Sporting Goods. Sorry, it looked like you had a question.
Me?
Yeah.
No, I just thought it was interesting that living here in Leesburg for I had no idea that those ramparts were still there, just like in the woods.
Still exist. Yeah, if you walk back in the woods, you'll see them there. Yeah, in the winter time when all the leaves are gone, you got to drive pretty slow. Be careful on that road because there are people going 1,000 miles an hour. But if you look into the woods, you can actually see it's almost like a lunette, what they call a one-sided covering that they dug out, depression. It's right in the woods.
That's really cool.
Yes, sir.
Can you see the Jackson House?
The Civil War, the American Battlefields Trust bought the Jackson House. God bless them, because that was part of the early morning fight. It is park property, but they have people living in there, so they don't like to go into the house. But you can see the house from the road back there.
Which road is it on?
I'll try to describe this here. Where the roundabout is, there's the road that goes into the woods, this road here, and then there's another road that goes off to the left. That's toward 100 yards down is the Jackson House. Yeah, it's right there. And it's been modernized. You can see all the extra rooms and stuff they've added on to it over the years, but that is the base of that is the no kidding house that was here during the Civil War. Widow Jackson and her daughters were living in that house while Union troops were in her front yard at her fence line firing at the Confederates.
Okay. You said there was a monument to the Massachusetts, or was it Virginia that was up by a tree?
That is to Clinton Hatcher. That is the monument honoring his death. Yes, sir. Right. As far as unit monuments, now I'm going to try to think here. The only unit monument here is from the 8th Virginia, local Loudoun County boys. They served out throughout the Civil War, all the way to Appomattox. They were on the far right line of Armistead's brigade during Pickett's charge, and just getting hammered by Union artillery that was up on Little Round Top. And Eppa Hutton was wounded there. They made it to the wall, and at the wall they're getting such heavy fire from Union muskets at that time that they laid down to provide protection, and then they were overran by the Union forces, and they lost their flag. By the end of the war, they had 1,292, if I remember right, 1,292 soldiers start the war, and the regiment surrendered at Appomattox in 1865 with 17. So some of those soldiers just went home, their enlistments, or they went home or were released from service, but a lot of them were wounded or killed, or died of illness. Once again, 2/3 of the casualties were illness. Okay. Any further questions?
Yeah.
Sir.
Have you ever thought about how long it took the Union soldiers to get down this bluff? And I heard those 4 pontoon boats to get back to Maryland, and they all sank.
Yes, sir. The only way they could get back was there's a total of 5. Okay. Close enough. They were basically rowboats, or 3 rowboats, a canal boat, and there was one other kind of odd cargo boat that they could get across and ferry people back and forth, back and forth. God bless them, they got 1,700 people across the river in 5 boats. And that's what the book that's written on this battle that we all use as guides. It's called, no, that's okay, ma'am. Thank you, though. But it's a little short of boats, because the General Stone wrote that, hey, things are going well. We're developing a situation. We don't know if we can take Leesburg or not, but everything's going pretty well. But we are a little short of boats, because they only had 5 of them to get across. And once again, once the Confederates had pushed them off this ridge, and they were being forced to swim across the river, all those boats were either sank or lost and went down the Potomac. Confederates were firing at the soldiers that did swim. There were bodies of Union soldiers that floated all the way down to Washington, D.C. The furthest ones wound up on the shoreline of Mount Vernon, that far down. Okay. Anything else?
There were troops at Edwards Ferry, were there not? Union?
Yes, sir.
And they were not sent here until after the battle?
Actually, they were here before. So there were 2 there's 2 battles going on. They had made a demonstration down by the 9th fairway of the golf course, and then pushed out a little bit farther, and they were in contact with Confederate troops also, but they pulled them back during the same day as this battle. The Union troops did try to break out late in the battle, but they just didn't get very far because there were enough muskets being fired at them that they couldn't make it. Okay. Anything else? Thank you. Gosh, you've stayed with me for almost 2 hours.
I had a question.
Yes, sir.
I hear there was a field hospital on that island.
There was.
Have you guys ever went digging?
You're not allowed to.
It's private property.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Oh, it's owned by a hunting club.
Oh,
believe it or not, and they hunt pheasants and geese and that kind of thing, and they got a firing range down there. But there are remnants of a barn that was made into a hospital during the battle.
That's Isaac Walton League, I think, is the one that has that.
It might be, sir. It might be. Yes, sir. Okay.
Does this trail go down to the river?
Yes, it does. In fact, if you follow me, if you've got any little children, just make sure you've got them in good stead, because it does. You'll see here, this bluff becomes obvious as we walk down. The Union troops ferried most of their boats. They went down the shoreline about 100 yards or 200 yards or so, and then they ferried them back and forth across that way. But all the Union troops that survived and got out of here went right down, back down that path.
Yeah. This way.
Yeah, back the way they came, and then pulling up. I can't remember. Oh, the gentleman there. Yeah, pulling the cannon up this trail by just sheer brute force. They had to unhook the horses because it was too tight to get around the corners. So there are soldiers on the wheels forcing that thing uphill. God bless them. Yes. Okay. All right. Cool. Okay. We've done our best to try to identify all the soldiers that died here or died of wounds, either way. What's kind of funny, it's kind of backward to what you would think. We've got a pretty darn good handle on the Confederate dead, because you can go to Leesburg Library and pull out a book about the Confederate that were buried in the cemeteries and in the surrounding area. The Union records are a little bit more sketchy. We've got, I think, 150 identified by name, but we know there were more than that. We originally were trying to make an effort to identify, okay, we don't know what, because they're all mixed together, who actually are the unknown in this grave, who are the 53 that we don't know. We've tried that, and that's if somebody's got a lot of spare time and good stuff on good luck on their hands, you can probably do that. We just haven't been able to do it.
You know, when they buried them, you said they have the skulls. Did they kind of just try to assemble the bones that a person would have? They just kind of
as they came upon bones, they put them in a box until the box was full, and then buried it. So there are
so it's just
bunch of ribs, bunch of thigh bones.
But at least they got that.
They got that, but we don't know if they got them all.
Right.
You just don't know.
I mean, bits could have been taken away by
animals,
carnivores and stuff like that. Yeah.
That's the sad part. Okay, but thank you once again for sticking with me all the way through this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. And please, thank you. And enjoy the rest of the day here.